Hi there, Frank here from REMEC, and this is part 2 of our video series on the new release of REMEC Momentum, the Standalones. And as you know, we have 2 variants or editions of the standalone strategies, PRO STR and PRO STR BT. STR stands for strategy and BT stands for backtestable. Now, both versions are backtestable, of course, but they're backtestable in a different way, and we'll talk about that in a later video. But let's start at the beginning and let's see why we have to, what they do and what the differences are. So first of all, these are standalone strategies, and that means that no third-party program is required to run them. Therefore, Bloodhound and Blackbird will not be required. These strategies were built to run directly on Ninja, resulting in immense speed improvements. And let's see what the differences are between them. So if you notice, after installation, we have 2 workspaces. And if I switch to the BT, or if I switch back to the PRO STR, you'll see that it's the same workspace visually. And there's no real secret here. This is basically just my favorite arrangement. You're, of course, free to move these charts or decrease the number of these charts. Any charts you're not really using, feel free to close them. The strategy itself will be running here on the chart in the middle, which in my practice is usually a tick chart, but you're free to run it on any type of bars. Momentum can handle any time frame and any bar type. So what are the differences between the 2 versions, and why do we have 2 editions? Let's turn our attention to PRO STR and let's see what PRO STR does. So we have an advanced algorithm that identifies the reemergence of momentum. Let me try to draw a very simple chart here. So let's imagine that we have a trend. We'll be looking for a trending market. And in a trending market, we'll have some consolidation areas, otherwise known as pullbacks. And the pullbacks are usually a sloping channel. But please note that these channels could be horizontal. That's why we call them consolidation. It's not always sloping. It's not always a pullback, but always some consolidation. And in a trend, usually there are several consolidation areas, and after a while, trends don't last forever. Something else will happen, and these consolidation areas basically start to flatten out, or another price action will develop. But when we're in a trend, these pullbacks are pretty standard market behavior. What we'll be looking for is enter the market, engage with the market when momentum reemerges. So in these areas, in these circles, and we call these the areas of business for us. This is where we want to be engaged with the market. This is what we'll be looking for. And our algorithm identifies these areas. Let me just use another color here. These areas, when price starts to move again, normally you would get a signal just like these. So this is when momentum emerges and price starts to move. At these points, you'll get a signal on the given time frame, whatever time frame you're on. You can use these signals in various ways, as you know, in NinjaTrader. You can use them automatically. You can just put them on the chart and make a manual decision to enter or not to enter. You can put an email alert on them. You can put a sound alert on them. There's a lot of things you can do with them. And what the strategy will do is the strategy, if switched on, important to say if switched on, the strategy will enter the market at these points. So let's see how that works. So we're looking at the PRO STR. And what the PRO STR does is we have a signal, an algorithmic signal, let's say at this point. And the strategy at this point will launch an ATM strategy. And if you're familiar with NinjaTrader, you know what an ATM strategy is advanced trade management in Ninja. Our algorithm will call an ATM strategy, which is called by default REMEC ATM, but you're free to create your own. and then we'll place an order on the market at these points based on criteria that is defined in the ATM. You are free to define anything in this ATM, anything you want, how many contracts you want to enter with, how do you want to move your trailing stops, if you want to have trailing stops at all, where you want to put the targets, and so on. Now, as a basic characteristic of NinjaTrader ATMs, that they cannot be backtested. I'm running ahead a little bit, but one word about the backtesting. You cannot just right-click on the chart and go strategy performance and backtest it. ATMs cannot be backtested. That's one reason we created the other variant. The other characteristic and the other reason we created the PRO STR BT variant is because if you notice, one thing is missing. If you really carefully study this chart, what's missing here is the parameter type can be a lot of things, can be 5 things, but you'll notice that one thing is missing, and that is the ATR. And ATR is average true range. ATR basically means the average size of a candle within a given look-back period. And for some reason, NinjaTrader doesn't give us the option. I would think, I'm not sure, but I would think it's because it's quite complicated to include that here. These others are much easier to do. Of course, these are very useful and they can be very useful. There's nothing wrong with them, but ATR is not on the list, and this will become important later. All right, so with the PRO STR, you are free to choose either currency, percent, price, ticks, or pips as a measurement unit when you define your trade management rules. So that's what the PRO STR does. Now, it follows from this that we wanted to have two things. We wanted to have the option to define measurement units in ATRs, and we wanted to have a version which is backtestable directly on the chart, or if not directly on the chart, at least in the strategy analyzer. All right, the strategy analyzer is not able to analyze ATM strategies, so we wanted to have a build a version which can be backtested in the strategy analyzer. So basically, PRO STR BT is the same thing as the PRO STR, but it differs in 2 important areas. One is that, and I'm going to switch to BT right now. So this is now BT. Everything's the same, as you can see, except that when you put on the strategy, you will see that in this case, the strategy, the algorithmic signal will not call an ATM because it doesn't need to. The algorithmic signal has built in a trade management engine which will allow you to define rules, trade management rules, and those rules will be defined in ATRs. And I hope you realize the importance of this because this is the coolest thing on earth. This is where you define your trade management rules. Other sections are quite similar to PRO STR's settings, but this section here is different. PRO STR doesn't have this. This is only something that BT has. And you can define 2 types of positions. All the measurement units are in ATRs. And you have realized already why this is very important, why this is significant. And let me just outline it quickly, the way I see it. So if you say 10 ticks, oh, okay, that's beautiful, 10 ticks, that's fine. But 10 ticks may be a lot, maybe a little, maybe a lot on ZB, maybe nothing on NQ. If I say, what's the other one? If I say $200, maybe that's a lot on the micro ES, but maybe it's nothing on silver. So these measurement units, for example, ticks or currency or even pips, if you want to create ATMs, you would probably, most likely, will need a different ATM for gold, a different ATM for the ES, a different ATM for the NQ, and you will end up 20 different ATMs if you monitor several markets. We wanted to create a situation where one strategy one trade management rule set is good on any instrument and any market you're trading. And ATR is what allows that. So let's jump back on PRO STR BT, because that's the one that uses ATR. And the way ATR works, and the reason why we say it's normalized, it's a normalized measurement unit, is that if I say 10 ticks, that could be a lot, that could be little. But if I say 2 ATRs, that's 2 ATRs no matter what, because an ATR is the average of a given look-back period. So if I say ATR, let's say, and you know this already, ATR, let's say brackets 20, that means it's the average size of the last 20 candles. Now imagine that if I'm on a market and usual candle size is like this, then the ATR 20 will simply calculate the average of the past 20 bars. But if the past 20 bars are bigger, like this is ZB, this would be NQ, it's a very jumpy instrument, then the ATR, the 2 ATR will be 2 ATR of this and 2 ATR of this. In other words, if we use ATRs as the measurement unit, the strategy automatically normalizes itself, which means one strategy can be used to trade any market. You still have to consider the settings, so there's no escaping that, but at least you will not need 20 different trade management rules because one will be enough. All right, so that should be enough. We'll stop here and we'll continue with more details in a future video. But basically, just to sum it up again, we have two variants of this strategy, of these standalone strategies. Very simple. The PRO STR calls an ATM, and the ATM is fully customizable, very useful. We use it every day. But just notice that the ATM doesn't have the measurement unit ATR on the list. And that made us think a while back, and also the fact that ATM strategies cannot be backtested on the chart and in the strategy analyzer, that made us think as well. And that's why we created a very advanced version of the same strategy, which we call STRBT. And STRBT measures everything in ATRs, and the strategy is natively backtestable in NinjaTrader in the strategy analyzer. Wherever you are, wherever your trading style is along the continuum between totally manual and totally automated, you can use this system very effectively. So that should be enough to get you started. And there's a lot of information on the user guide, in the user guide on the website. And we'll be back with more specific details and practical applications of these two strategies. Thanks very much, and mindful trading.